You keep accusing me of blasphemy all of the time, but I cannot be convicted of a victimless crime. Atheists are people too.
I'm Annie Laurie Gaylor, and that was Dan Barker, my missing co-host today, calling blasphemy a victimless crime from his song Friendly Neighborhood Atheist on FFRF's Friendly Neighborhood Atheist CD. And speaking of blasphemy, we have on the phone from Dublin, Ireland, two activists with Atheist Ireland who have been fighting blasphemy laws in their country for many years. Michael Nugent, who's the actual founder of Atheist Ireland and a writer and blogger, and Jane Donnelly of Atheist Ireland, who's a human rights officer who has worked with Atheist Ireland for 10 years. And I know both of you must be working very, very hard because you have anti-blasphemy referendum on your ballot to remove the Irish blasphemy law from the Irish Constitution. And welcome to Freethought Radio.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to talk to you.
So before we talk about that blasphemy law, I wanted to ask, is this repeal one of the main missions of Atheist Ireland? Have you played an integral role in this?
Yes, well, coincidentally, around the time that Atheist Ireland was founded, which was a decade ago, Ireland added a new blasphemy law to our statute book. So it almost became one of our founding issues by default because it caused such a controversy at the time. So because the law is based on a provision in the Constitution that says that blasphemy is an offence, it requires a constitutional amendment to enable us to get rid of it as a law. So we've been campaigning both within Ireland and also at the United Nations, where they have been pressurising Ireland because our law breaches human rights treaties that we've signed up to. We've been campaigning for the last decade to get this referendum, and we're now, less than a week away from the vote to find out whether we're going to succeed or not.
Well, congratulations on getting this far. And when is that vote?
Vote is on Friday, the 26th of October.
And I understand that that is the same time that you have your presidential election.
It is. There are two votes that day on the 26th. One for blasphemy and the other is the presidential election. And there's a number of people going forward for president. And also you can vote on the blasphemy. And it's a yes vote to remove it from our written constitution and no if you want to retain it. But we're hopeful that it will be removed. It's been there since 1937 and we think it is time that it should go.
So there should be a very good voter turnout.
Well, maybe not. And, unfortunately, for whatever reason, the political parties have been downplaying this. I think their position is that they think that it will go through without much fuss. And so they haven't been campaigning very hard on it. And that then in turn means that the media haven't been focusing a lot on it. So we do actually have a concern that there will be a higher number than usual of people going into the ballot stations in order to vote for president who won't understand or won't have thought through the blasphemy issue because the media hasn't been covering it as much as they should have.
And as well as that, a lot of people didn't realise that it was in our Constitution, even though it came up 10 years ago and it was put into the Defamation Act. A lot of people didn't realise that, and they don't know how to define blasphemy. They don't know what it is. So it's kind of like an education at this stage of what is blasphemy, why is it in our Constitution, and why it needs to be removed. So there was opinion polls, and there was a lot of people said that they didn't know, but we think that they said that they didn't know which way they were going to vote because they didn't know it was in the Constitution.
Yeah,
so
I can
there is
see.
a lot of education.
So I don't know if it's true in Ireland, but here in this country, I think the tendency of voters is if you don't understand the referendum, vote no. So that must be a little concerning.
It is indeed.
But on the other hand,
it is. Put it in perspective, though, Annie Laurie, the latest opinion polls are 51% yes, 17 to 19% no, and then a huge number of undecided, around 30% undecided. I think that's down to about 25% now. So in principle, if you take the undecided out, we have a fairly strong lead, but that could be eaten into depending on if people coming up and deciding, well, if I don't understand it, the safe thing to do is to leave things as they are.
But you must be rather buoyed by the fact that this, I can't remember if it was spring or summer, this year, Ireland did finally get rid of its anti-abortion wording from your constitution, which was a huge thing.
Yes, that was huge for us, and we campaigned very strongly on that. And as well as that, the marriage referendum the few years previously,
yes,
we campaigned on that. So that's two very positive referendums from our point of view, that we campaigned on both of those. But we will not take this for granted. We are out campaigning for a yes vote to remove it from our constitution. And as with everything, even over the abortion referendum, we were always anxious about that, and we got ourselves and did some work on the ground, leafleting, having stalls, doing meetings, and doing a lot of interviews to ensure that we do our absolute utmost to get it removed and to send a signal to other countries that where their laws are much more restrictive on blasphemy, that sometimes blasphemy, they're executed because of blasphemy, and we want to send a message that it's not acceptable to do that. We want to send a message of support to those people in those various countries, such as Pakistan, that are in jail, that are afraid of their blasphemy laws, and who are being persecuted because of those blasphemy laws. And we must realise that the main people that get persecuted are religious people over blasphemy laws. So it is religious people that should be out voting yes and supporting getting rid of blasphemy laws, because they suffer persecution in a lot of countries because of them.
And I know, Michael, I've heard you say that maybe the blasphemy laws are not enforced in the Republic of Ireland, but they can be used to excuse the blasphemy laws in many of these Islamist nations where the blasphemy laws are enforced.
That's right. And indeed, when we passed our blasphemy law in 2009, 2010, at the time, the Islamic states at the United Nations were trying to spread blasphemy laws internationally. They were describing it as defamation of religion laws. And what they started doing in order to try to expose what they call Western hypocrisy is they started using the wording of the definition of blasphemy from the Irish law as what they wanted enforced around the world. Because as Heiner Bielefeld, who was the UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion and belief at the time, said, they like to do that. They like to say, well, you're telling us to stop enforcing our blasphemy laws, but look at this Western country that has passed a new blasphemy law just a couple of years ago. So it's very important symbolically and politically on an international level that Ireland removed this law to show solidarity with the victims of these laws in Islamic countries.
So before we go out for our break, that's coming up in a couple minutes, what is that definition of blasphemy that's in the Irish Constitution?
The definition is saying or publishing anything that is grossly abusive or insulting in relation to matters held sacred by any religion, thereby causing outrage among a substantial number of the adherents of the religion. So there's so many things in that are ambiguous and just legally almost unquantifiable that it's a very difficult law to imagine how they would even enforce if they wanted to. So it hasn't been formally enforced within Ireland, but what it has caused is it has caused media outlets to self-censor themselves. So, for example, I've been told before live broadcast interviews in Ireland, make sure you don't say anything blasphemous. We've had articles submitted to print publications that have been either edited or not printed because of concerns that conservative readers might find it blasphemous. So it is having an actual effect on the ground, because media outlets, who, to be fair to them, aren't typically set up to challenge the law. They're set up just to run a newspaper or a radio station. They'll just run a mile from the issue because they just don't want to get involved in it.
Well, and couldn't it be argued that if you espouse atheism, you're by definition blasphemous?
Well, that actually leads to another problem with our law, which is, with blasphemy laws, which is that they only think it's important to protect religious people. They don't protect atheists because it's only religious feelings that are protected by it. So we had, for example, Jane and I were at a conference a few years ago where two theologians said from the podium that atheists are not fully human. Now, now obviously we don't want them to be taken to court over that, but if we did, we couldn't, because the law only protects religious feelings. It doesn't protect atheist beliefs.
So I'm talking with Jane Donnelly and Michael Nugent, our friends from Atheist Ireland, about the very exciting prospect of getting rid of the blasphemy provisions in the Irish Constitution in the Republic of Ireland, so entrenched in the past in Roman Catholicism and now leading the way in Western nations with many, many progressive actions. So when we come back, I want to ask both of you a little bit more about what Atheist Ireland is doing besides working to repeal this blasphemy law and what it's like to be an atheist in Ireland. I'm Annie-Laurie Gaylord.
Speaking freely, thinking freely. This is Freethought Radio.
Welcome back. I'm Annie-Laurie Gaylord, and we have on the phone all the way from Dublin two guests, two activists with the group Atheist Ireland, and we've been talking about getting out the vote next Friday, October 26th. In the Republic of Ireland, there is a referendum to remove the blasphemy provisions from the Irish Constitution, and a very good shot at doing so. So welcome back to my guests, Jane Donnelly and Michael Nugent. And so I know that you've been very instrumental in getting this provision on the ballot, and we'll have to wait and see what happens. But in the meantime, what else is Atheist Ireland up to in these days? And I think a lot of our listeners would wonder what it's like to be an atheist in Ireland.
Well, at the moment, Atheist Ireland is working in a good few areas. Of course, our biggest the area would be the education system. And also another area is the health system, because after the abortion ban was removed from our constitution, we now are putting in place legislation. So there's an awful lot going on in the background there over that because of conscientious objections and whether you would refer on a woman to another doctor if you have a conscientious objection. So that's in the area of health that's going on.
And I suppose that would be...
area,
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, another area for us is about our National Maternity Hospital in Dublin, which is in religious hands. The religious nuns run it. And we are opening up a new National Maternity Hospital with state money, and the state is going to hand that over to the nuns again.
Oh, no.
So there's been a huge protest about that in the last year or so. And last night I was at a meeting and I listened to Mary O'Connor, who has investigated this whole area in detail about all the legalities of it. And we have her speech to the meeting up on Atheist Ireland's YouTube channel. And it is a fascinating study of how religious bodies can control a health service and an essential service, and particularly for women. And it just shows clearly how they can influence that and how can they control women's bodies and what women do with their own bodies.
And unfortunately, this is happening in the United States as well, with mergers of public or secular hospitals with Catholic, and then they take over. But Jane, just briefly, what are the hazards of that?
Well, they have to uphold their ethos, the religious hospitals. Same thing with the religious schools. So they will not allow abortion. There's issues with end-of-life care. There's issues with sterilization, contraception, all those areas where the Catholic Church have a social and political view and a social policy on. So they affect that. So we're very, very concerned about this. And on this Saturday, there is a meeting of interested groups in relation to campaigning, getting all groups together to campaign against our national maternity hospital in Dublin being in the control of religious bodies and handing over state money, I think it's 350 million, to a religious body and of our taxpayers' money, so they can control the lives of women, and particularly in childbirth and in relation to sterilization, all those areas. And we really have to work hard to make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, yes, it's good you're there. And then, Michael, I wanted to ask, how are atheists accepted in the Republic of Ireland now?
Well, I think we've moved on considerably from when Atheist Ireland was founded. When we were started, one of our first tasks was just to normalise the use of phrases like atheist and secular in general discourse and in parliamentary discourse. And I think we've moved on now. We don't have to start all of our media interviews by explaining what atheism is. It's more normalised. The difficulty is, although most of the people have moved on from being controlled by the Catholic Church, most people will still nominally describe themselves as Catholic, even though they don't practice any of the tenets of Catholicism. And so we also have to challenge the fact that when the Catholic Church was in control, they got a lot of laws passed, some of them embedded into the Constitution, that still give them control over schools, hospitals, property rights that ordinary groups don't have. And so really what we're trying to do now is to get the law and the state to catch up with the fact that the people are no longer controlled by the Catholic Church.
So it's kind of to disestablish the Church.
It effectively is, because it has the 1937 Constitution was written by a very Catholic Prime Minister in conjunction with the Catholic Archbishop of Dublin at the time. They more or less wrote the Constitution together. So the Constitution provides legal support for them having exceptional property rights and rights to discriminate on the grounds of religion in schools and healthcare and training units that they run. So unfortunately, we might have to chip away with a load of referendums in order to finally make the state reflect the reality of the people having moved on.
Well, so far you've got a great batting average, so we're really glad you're there. Now, isn't it true that there's a reference to Jesus in the Irish Constitution?
Well, it starts off in the name of the Holy Trinity, we the people of Ireland. So that's how it starts. And then there's references to God. And then, another example of this is at our presidential election, which we will be voting on the same day. In order to take up office, the president has to take a religious oath, and that's written into our Constitution. So a conscientious atheist can't become president of Ireland.
It's not like your situation over there, where I know you've taken cases about it, where they claim that they're kind of just adding on the phrase, so help me God. In ours, the wording is written into the Constitution that you have to say it.
Of course.
So that means that we have to have a constitutional referendum to change that.
Yeah.
So that if a conscientious atheist wants to become a president or go for president, they can do so without having to, in some cases, pretend to take the religious oath, which is really awful in a modern democratic republic.
Well,
We have to do something like this.
we only have about a minute and a half left, so let's bring it back to this all-important referendum next Friday to repeal the blasphemy provisions. What's at stake?
Well, what's at stake is, firstly, in practical terms, getting rid of a constitutional provision that is obsolete, that causes the media to self-censor itself, that breaches our international human rights obligations, and that is used by repressive regimes around the world as political cover for their persecution of religious minorities and atheists. But also, it is important to keep up the momentum for a secular Ireland, to keep up the momentum from winning the marriage equality referendum and the abortion referendum, and continuing the progress that Ireland is making in moving on from what was a Catholic country to what is now a pluralist country, but still with a lot of Catholic laws.
And I think I do want to mention that there was a skirmish over the blasphemy law. We only have about a minute left, but with Stephen Fry, the comedian. Can you briefly talk about that?
Yeah, he was investigated for saying things about God on a television program, and the investigation wasn't carried through because the police found that under the law that there wasn't outrage shown in public. So that shows one of the dangers of our law, that it incentivises people to cause outrage. So if hypothetically, if we had another Danish cartoon controversy here and some fundamentalist Islamists tried to get a blasphemy case, all the police could say is, well, go away and show us some outrage. And that's the last thing you want to encourage in a situation like that.
Right. It's mob rule, the heckler's veto. Well, thank you both for joining Freethought Radio today, Michael Nugent and Jane Donnelly, some of our favorite activists, and you've done so much, and we can't pray about the outcome. We know you're going to be working really hard leafleting and tabling in the next 8 days, so good luck to you, and thanks again for joining Freethought Radio.